much to Reverend Dr. Cheryl Anthony, to all of you here assembled. Again, my name is Kareem Kamara. I have the distinction of serving in the New York State Assembly, 43rd District. But more than that, I know about powers and principalities. So my highest office is really that of a pastor of Abundant Life Church here in Brooklyn, New York. A pleasure to be here. So good to see so many friends, pastors who serve, pastor churches in the district that I represent. A pleasure and honor to be here. More than anything, even though he's not here yet, let's thank our Senator Eric Adams for the great work that he's doing and bringing us together. And not only, can you hear the microphone? Is the microphone on to its capacity? Can you all hear me there in the back? Guess not. Either that or the food is that good that I'm paying attention. Yeah. Okay. Well, not only that, serving as a senator, but you all know, and we as Christians and whether we're Christian or Jewish here, we can all relate to Jabez. And we know that in Jabez, he prayed that God enlarge his territory. And this is not a political event, but you all know that it seems like God plans on enlarging the territory of our Senator Eric Adams. So let's keep him in our prayers as in 2013. If you understand what I'm saying, you can read between the lines of his territory and the area he serves as an elected official will be enlarged. But more than that, I think it's only fitting that we're here in Brooklyn as members of faith communities talking about the foreclosure crisis, and that we're going to hear from our Attorney General. Because years, at least a decade before, people were talking about the subprime mortgage crisis on a national level. We were talking about it right here in Brooklyn. And even though we didn't know all the terms about collateralized debts and international markets, we knew that something wasn't right. We knew that there were too many seniors who were getting mortgages that they could not afford. We knew something was wrong when people sat down at closings and many of our seniors and other people who were not financially astute were told, don't worry, you don't need an attorney. The mortgage broker has an attorney. Sit down with us, use our attorney, you don't have anything to worry about. And those same seniors on fixed incomes, once it came down to meet those monthly payments, we knew something was wrong. So we were talking about this. We were talking about predatory loans before this became a national issue. So we want to thank all of you here in Brooklyn because you foresaw it. And not only did we foresee it, but you all are here collectively to make sure that we do everything in our power to protect those people that need it. And we're thankful that later on we'll hear from the Attorney General. We're going to hear from Attorney General Schneiderman. And that's important because, as you know, President Obama has made him the head of a national task force. But before that, he was one of two attorney generals in the country that said, we cannot settle with the banks yet because we don't know the full extent of the damage. So many other attorney generals said, let's settle. Just give us a couple of $1 billion and we'll just say it's all right. And he said, no, we have to know the extent of the damage before we settle with the banks. We have to know the destruction they cause in our communities before we settle. So we look forward to an exciting day, exciting information, but hopefully you'll stay in touch with Senator Adams and with each other when we leave here today, so that it's not just a one-day luncheon, but that we are partners together in solving the respective problems in our community. We have another outstanding elected official here with us today. This man, you all know that they used to call James Brown the hardest working man in show business. Well, this man is definitely in the running, the hardest working man in government. He works 24 hours a day. If there was a 25th day, he worked 25 hours a day. If he worked 7 days a week, if there was an 8th day in a week, he worked 8 days a week. He's dedicated to our community and to the issues that impact our community. My mother always said, you gotta know the man who manages the money, who counts the money, who's overseeing how the city's money is spent. So he's someone who's protecting us to make sure that the taxpayers' dollars, when it comes to hospitals and schools and all the institutions that impact our community, he wants to make sure that your taxpayer dollars are spent wisely. Let's welcome none other than someone who's one of our own, the New York City Comptroller, John Liu, as he comes to us and gets us today. Welcome, Mr. Comptroller.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much, Assemblymember Kamara, for that delightful introduction, probably over generous. But thank you for that. Wonderful to join all of you, to join Reverend Anthony and all the Reverend clergy and our faith-based leaders here in Brooklyn for this very special luncheon. There are a lot of issues that are going around in the city, state, and country. And as leaders, you really are in critical positions that help people on an individual basis, with their families, or whole communities altogether, to get through some of these very difficult times that we have seen. These last few years have been probably the deepest recession since the Great Depression. And people are hurting and have been hurting. Now the economy seems to be picking up a little bit. My office does project that there will be some growth over the next couple of years. Not tremendously astounding growth, but some growth that will restore some level of prosperity. And I think it's important that not only do we restore prosperity to the city, not only do we reduce unemployment in the city of New York, but we also work to ensure that that prosperity is shared by not just the top ranks, but by everybody in the city. And that it's not just about reducing unemployment rates, it's also about reducing unemployment disparities, where certain communities of color face much higher unemployment rates, not because people can't do the work or lack the skills and know-how, but because sometimes the opportunities are not available on a level playing field on an equal access basis. So there's lots of work that we have to do to make sure that our economy works for everybody. And you may have heard that in the last couple of weeks,
our state senator, and of course the Medgar and the president is here, Bill Pollard, good friend, and thank you so much for having this event here. And just to highlight the importance of the endeavor that we're involved in here, in the Bible, in the book of Psalms, we read, "The heavens are the heavens to God, and the earth was given to man." And in the Talmud, it actually explains that this verse teaches us that a person who doesn't have a little piece of his own ground is not a person. That the earth was given to man means that every person needs to have a little piece of earth to call his own. And that's the endeavor that we're in here today, to talk about how to help homeowners hold on to that little piece of something that they can tie themselves to. And this is a very, very, very important and godly task that we're engaged in here. Furthermore, there's a very interesting law in the Bible itself. One of the 613 commandments that the Jewish people observe, and its teaching is something that's very important for all of us to understand. It says in the Bible that if you loan money to somebody and you take collateral, you take the cover that the poor person needs to cover themselves with to keep warm at night. So do not lie down with that collateral. Return it to the person so they can sleep peacefully, and then in the morning you'll come and take it back again. It's a very strange law, because if the banks worked on that strategy, that you have to return the collateral every night and then give it back in the morning, we wouldn't be able to have mortgages and buy homes. So obviously it's not logical, but nevertheless this is a value that the Bible teaches us, that there's something more important than securing your repayment of the loan, and that is to make sure that a person should have a roof over their head, a blanket to cover themselves with, and a secure place to be in this world. And that's an important value. So as we engage, I guess the panel was a little delayed, so we got to be the fill-in. You know, when I was for many years a chaplain at NYU, and in doing so, I several times had the ability to speak, but I would always tell people, chew quietly, as long as you listen, it's good. But anyway, I wasn't called to make speeches, I was called to give a prayer, but I think the inspiration from the Bible over here is very important, and it gives us the setting by which we're joined here.
Dylan, and just a long relationship we've had over the years. And, you know, so many faces long relationship with you. And you know, it's good to walk through a room and you're shaking hands with people who have prayed for you throughout the years.
Right now.
And many of us have transformed and went through different titles during a period of time. A couple of you were deacons. And now I see you have your own churches and deaconess, and now you're doing some great things. And so we're in a great room right now, and I just want to briefly say, because this is a teaching moment, and bringing the AG in, the Attorney General in, and have them talk about the issue surrounding our mortgages. And you may have missed the article when the entire state made an attempt to settle the foreclosure issue. And all the AGs all over the country decided to basically turn their back on the people who suffered. They made a calculative decision that they were basically going to tell the banks, okay, don't do it again. And we met with the Attorney General in his office, and we sat down and we talked to him, because life is different 20,000 feet up. Everything on the terrain looks the same. But when you go on the ground and you are where the rubber meets the road, house by house, block by block, church by church, you realize that what is the appearance from 20,000 feet up is different from what takes place on the ground. Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brownsville, Brooklyn Avenue, South Jamaica, Queens, all over this city, the banks have tortured and humiliated and robbed the dignity of everyday families. And I said, our AG, affectionately call him Eric S. I was Eric A, and he was Eric S. I said, we can't just let this go down this way. And he said, let me look at this again. And he came back and he said, something is wrong. And the AG was the lone standout from allowing the deal to go forward. Wow. The lone standout of all the AGs. He was the lone standout and forced everyone back to the table. And his colleagues across the country all criticized and attacked him. And he stood firm and stood tall. And because of that, they had to reshape a new deal that impacts our people, because we have only begun. Because we have to make people whole in a very real way. We have to fix credit scores so that people can go out and repurchase homes and go out and get employment, because you know now they're denying you employment based on your credit scores. And this problem is not just for those who live in the homes. So many churches are going through foreclosures issue. Banks want you to deposit your tithes and offerings, yet they won't give you a loan. All right. It's a major issue that's impacting us. And so as Reverend Dillon went over those different titles of studying and burning the midnight oils, there's something that's a common denominator for every step I took in life, from an associate's to a bachelor's to a master's, or from sergeant to captain. I had a home. Home is more than just four walls where people go to sit down and rest. Home is the precursor that allows you to sleep, to participate in the American dream. Without it, you are put to a nightmarish reality that you're outside the dream. People were destroyed by what happened with these banks. No major federal prosecution. Got a young boy that was steal an apple and go to jail, but we have people who have stole the apple of our eyes, our home, and they're still living free. No major prosecution. No widespread prosecution of those who were involved in what took place. History is not going to be kind to the prosecutors across this country when we do a reflection and revisit of what happened and people's lives were destroyed. Americans were destroyed what happened with this banking and foreclosure issue. And then no one said that, well, you know, since you Baptist, it's going to be all right. No one said, well, since you Hasidic, it's going to be all right. a mosque is going to be all right? These cowards and thieveries and hoodlums robbed us all, regardless of our ethnicity, geographical location, or where we worship, or where we pray, or where we eat. They took away where we sleep.
Thank you.
There's no greater robbery than taking away a place where you sleep. Home is where you go when you're hurting. Home is where you go when you want to heal. Home is where you go when you believe that you have no place else to go. It's the foundation that we build. Everything we think about is built from home. When you're uncertain, at least you got a home to go to. When you don't know where you can go, difficult days, you have a home to go to. When you take away the home of a person, you rob them of everything that's precious to them. And so that's why this is an important issue. That's why we assembled you here together. Others may not realize, but I do. If you were just a preacher, if you just had to prepare your sermons every Sunday, this would be an easy task. I know what you go through. I know the hours and hours of prayer. I know how many times you go home with drenched shirts because people cried on your shoulders because they are afraid. And the only answers that you can give them is that we will continue to be faithful. Part of your faithfulness is putting people in power that are going to do the right thing. There are too many people that are hurting the faith that you have. You're doing your share, pastors and clergies and deacons and those who are members of the anatomy of our church family. You're doing your share. We have to do ours. We got to do better. We have too many good elected officials. We need great ones. We need great ones. To accomplish what we need to accomplish, good isn't good enough. Mediocrity is not going to solve the issues we're impacting. We are now at the moment that emerging from our communities need to be a level of great leaders that duplicates what you're doing in your churches every day. You held this together, and I say it over and over again. Long before we had fancy cafes on Bedford Avenue, you were here. Long before they were renaming it Vesta and Stuyvesant Heights and other fancy names, you were here. Long before we were waking up to alarm clocks, we were waking up to gunshots, you were here. So we can't all of a sudden remove the welcome mats that has been laid out for years in the borough of Brooklyn and rip it away and say you are no longer acceptable and this borough is no longer affordable to the people that sit in your pews every day. That can't happen.
All right.
That can't happen. That's the fight. The fight is to make sure this borough remains inclusive. The fight is to make sure that every yeshiva, every mosque, every church, every school, all our children participate in the prosperity that what this borough has to offer. And at the heart of all of this is to protect our homes. And that's why the AG navigated the roads of this city to come across Brooklyn Bridge to be here on Bedford Avenue and at Medgar Evers College to have a real conversation with the people who are not 20,000 feet up, but the people who are on the ground, so you can feed your parishioners that help is on the way. Continue to be faithful. Continue to believe in the person that is our AG in the state of New York, AG Eric Snyder.
Oh, this brings back fond memories of why I never liked to follow him in debates in the Senate. Thank you, Senator Adams, good friend. Thanks to my good friends here at Medgar Evers and distinguished members of the clergy. It is an honor to be here with you. I am joined today by folks from my staff who work on the matters that I'm going to speak to you about. And what I'm going to talk to you about, as Senator Adams indicated, is some pretty rough stuff. I'm going to talk to you about a severe period of misconduct in the history of corporate America, and I'm going to talk to you about a severe period of inaction, negligence, or worse in the government of the United States of America. So I know we're supposed to be here to work in spirit and in truth, well, I'm going to bring you the truth. And believe me, if we have the spirit to follow through on what the truth tells us, we will have a new day for these communities, for your communities, and for all of America, and that's what we ought to be working for. So I'm here with people from my office who are working on issues related to the mortgage crisis and the housing crisis. Dina Levy, Lois Booker Williams, Rochelle Kelly, and Mike Dean identify themselves. We are digging in the Office of the New York State Attorney General for a long haul on these issues. We did not get into this situation overnight. We will not get out overnight. But we're not going to get out at all unless we are clear and honest with each other about what happened, what battles we have won so far, and what battles lie ahead. With that, let me talk to you about three things I'm going to speak about as briefly as I can. It's important to understand, first of all, what happened. It's important to understand what happened because one of the great sins, in my view, that people in the public sphere commit all too often is the sin of rewriting history, is the sin of pretending what happened did not happen. So it's very important for you all to understand how the housing crisis happened. What did the first settlement that we got achieve? What resources does that mean we can make available to your constituents? And then finally, what are we doing to push this even further? So the problem is not complicated. People try to make it seem complicated. For years, America operated on a system where you could borrow money to buy a home, called a mortgage. There was a lend and hold model. I had 2 mortgages, both 30-year fixed rate. The bank that made the loan is the bank I paid off. That's the old system. Sometime in the 1990s, we switched over to a system that is outlined here, which I call the securitization machine. The idea was no longer for a bank to lend you money and hold on to that mortgage. Mortgages were given out by mortgage brokers and lenders, and then this group of large banks started pooling thousands of mortgages. They would deposit them in a trust, and then slice that up and sell shares of the trust. So when you bought a mortgage-backed security, I would get a security, like a stock, share, that entitled me to a piece of all the income of all those people paying their mortgages. This is what happened, and they were good investments. A lot of them were bought by mutual funds. A lot of them were bought by pension funds all over the world. So people were buying shares of the money that everyone was paying every month on their mortgages. And that was a good investment because back then, 30-year fixed rate mortgages, most people paid, not such a bad investment. Then 2 things changed, and the 2 things that changed are, first of all, and this is where misconduct in government comes in. I believe in government as a force for good. I believe in the public sector doing great things. I believe in Social Security. I believe in Medgar. In fact, I believe in Medicare for everybody. But because I believe in the government as a force for good, I have to be, and Senator Adams, I know, shares my views, we have to be the harshest critic of misconduct, fraud, and abuse in the government. If we're going to tell your constituents, pay your taxes, the government can do good things, we have to tell the truth when things go wrong. And what went wrong in the government in the last decade or so was a period of reckless deregulation. They invented these complicated financial instruments called derivatives. There was a decision made and enshrined in the Commodities Modernization Act of 2000 that we weren't going to regulate those. You don't even have to understand too much about what they are. It has a lot more to do with what you will find if you go to a complicated sports betting parlor than what you will find in a regular stock market. But you can place those bets now and they're not on any exchange. Second, they actually changed the rules in 2001, so banks had to put aside less money to cover themselves in the event of defaults on mortgages. Unbelievable in retrospect. But this was the era where the doctrine of deregulation was held sway in Washington, and they had their way. And then finally, in 2004, not only did the federal government say, we are not going to passed legislation to stop predatory lending. They passed a law to preempt us. They passed a law to prohibit state governments from enacting laws against predatory lending. So you can see there was this pattern that allowed people to place bigger and bigger bets with less and less money set aside, and that opened the door to a disaster. And the second thing that happened was, as always happens since the beginning of markets back in the 1600s, the market changed. Up to about 2003, interest rates were very low, and you remember there was a lot of encouragement of people to take out mortgages. A lot of renters thought, oh, I can do better taking out a mortgage and buying a house. A lot of people wanted to refinance their mortgages because interest rates were low. Then in 2003, interest rates started to go up, and quite candidly, pretty much anyone who should have had a mortgage in the United States had a mortgage by 2004. People who could afford a mortgage, even if they hit some hard times, they had a mortgage. But the securitization machine was making so much money selling the shares of these mortgage-backed securities that they decided they could keep the party going by simply lowering the standards for loans. So it wasn't that there were more people who could afford mortgages, it's that they started selling more and more negative amortization mortgages. We actually owe more each month, or interest-only mortgages with balloons. No documentation loans, which is something that would have been unheard of 15, 20 years ago, became very, very popular. And you can see in this chart, this shows one of the worst parts of this was we got to the point where about 30% of the people getting mortgages were never, ever getting out of that hole that they had dug themselves into. The next step everyone knows about. The period between 2004 and 2007 is really where the bubble took place, where the reckless deregulation and the fact that the markets had changed and mortgages weren't as cheap anymore led to worse and worse products, which led to worse and worse legislation on predatory lending. When they changed the mortgage to allow no documentation loans, this was a man-made catastrophe. You have to back me up on this. They act as though, you know, in Leviticus, after it tells you not to eat shrimp, it says, oh, and by the way, don't regulate derivatives. No, not there. I've checked. There is no rule, there is no law, there is nothing other than greed and recklessness that caused this collapse. So, what happened? Over the last 5 years, American families lost $7.4 trillion in home equity. $7.4 trillion. The communities that were hit the hardest were the African American and Latino communities because they tended to have more of their wealth in the equity of their homes. So according to one survey, the median black household lost 80% of its wealth. The Latino households, the median household lost about 2/3 of its wealth, 66%, and the comparable loss for white households was about 34%. So people's home wealth, but it also affected a lot of people who did not even have mortgages, and this is important to keep in mind. People who had never even participated in the market were hurt. Unemployment spiked. There were all these people who were just like, you know, I'm just minding my own business, renting my apartment, but now I'm out of work. That was all because of the rise and fall of this man-made catastrophe that was the mortgage market. So that's where we are. To this day, unemployment is unacceptably high, very high in, I'm sure, many of the communities that you represent, and not coming down anytime quickly without much more dramatic action by the government. I think we can and will take such action, but it does require us to do work. So let's look at New York. There are about 115,000 underwater mortgages in New York. That means that the people owe more on the mortgage than their home is worth. There are a larger portion of mortgages that are either in foreclosure or about to go into foreclosure. The 4 counties that were hit the hardest, this is very important, because a lot of parts of New York there wasn't much of a boom and so there wasn't much of a bust. Brooklyn, Queens, Nassau, and Suffolk were hit the hardest. That is where the disaster hit us. When we have a map, you can see
where the foreclosure filings were. And I'm sure those of you who know how to read a map of Brooklyn and read a map of Queens and who lives where, you can understand the implications of this map, which communities were hit the hardest. So that's the disaster that took place, and that's what we are trying to address. I took office after the crash. I took office in January 2011 and discovered that this, the crash had taken place. There really wasn't a big effort to investigate the conduct I've talked about so far, but on top of that, there was a new type of harm being done to the people in our communities. So let's take a look at this. When the market crashed, the banks who were in charge of these pools of mortgages, they couldn't service the mortgages anymore. We can go back to the third slide. Yeah, that one. So you can see here, when they had all the mortgages in the trust, they had to, the banks, continue to provide services for which they charged a fee to service the mortgages. They would collect the money from the people who had to pay, they would provide the money to the people who owned the stock, and in the rare cases where there were defaults, they had to take care of foreclosures. So the big banks didn't just pool the mortgages, they also did what's called servicing. Then, we go forward again, one more, yep. The servicing system collapsed. They had too many defaults. They couldn't handle it. So again, instead of saying, we can't handle this, we need help, go to the government, try and come up with a program, they just went back to their old ways and started cutting corners. That's when we started to see things like robo-signing. They didn't have time to read all of the documents and make sure that they had the right house and the right owner. So they started filing false and misleading documents. There were fees that were tacked on to mortgages, often that didn't belong there, and there were misrepresentations of identity. The homeowners who were in a trial modification were told, here, give us extra money, we're going to take care of you, you're not going to be foreclosed on, would later hear from someone else they never had met in the bank saying, oh, never mind that person, we're foreclosing on you. It's called dual tracking, where different branches of the bank, some would squeeze the money and the others would just come in and foreclose. So that is where I entered office, and as Eric Adams has said, stated, and he and a lot of my colleagues here, my colleagues in government who do have the interests of the people at heart, provided me with a lot of support for this position. But there was a settlement on the table when I took office that essentially would have given the banks complete immunity just for taking care of the problems in servicing, taking care of the problems of dual tracking and robo-sign. Now, we wanted to stop bad foreclosures, right? We wanted to make sure people were not being improperly foreclosed on, but there was no way I was going to sign off on a release to give them immunity for the conduct that caused the bubble and crash to begin with. So I arrived here, and I was a brand new AG, and it made some people in Washington unhappy that I didn't want to go along with this. But I view this as having turned into a very positive, sort of tough love relationship with the president and his administration. Because at the end of the day, they did listen. And I was able to narrow the releases given the banks enough so that we secured the largest mortgage settlement in American history. And I want to tell you now, because I need your help, to make sure your constituents know what is going to be available. The first thing we're going to get is cash to the states. Now, this is, again, those of us who believe in government as a force for good have to call it out when it's not working. We negotiated to get a larger portion of the cash payment per distressed homeowner than any other state, because I knew in New York we actually have pretty good laws to protect you from wrongful foreclosure if you have access to a housing counselor and you have access to an attorney. But at the time I took office, half the people in the state were going through a foreclosure without having the chance to speak once to an attorney at any stage of the proceeding. You cannot enforce your rights if you don't know what your rights are. So I ensured that we got more money than any other state per mortgage to deal with legal services. We also got some different programs of consumer relief, unlike the other programs that existed before, mandatory relief, not voluntary for the banks, something that they're required to do and we can enforce. And then finally, we reformed the way they do servicing and have a national monitor to make sure they follow through. So first of all, the participating banks in this settlement were the 5 largest banks that were involved in the mortgage bubble and crash. We are still negotiating with other banks, but it's important to understand that if people come to you and they have a mortgage with a different bank, they may still be eligible for relief. But these 5 banks offered to provide cash for us, and the first thing I did with that was we went to my colleagues in the legislature where the money for legal services for foreclosure prevention was set to zero out on April 15th of this year. We saved the legal services, kept the doors open, and last month the HUD Secretary and I announced a $60 million commitment to making sure that we fund legal services all across New York State and housing counseling so that no one in our state is ever wrongfully foreclosed on because they couldn't get to a lawyer. That's not going to be subject to budget battles in Albany. That can't be taken away. That's a hard commitment. We've got the money and we're going to preserve that. So that's the first step of what we're looking for. And we've already got anchor partners for that, and the money is in the process of being distributed. We had requests for applications that have already come back in, and we hope to get the money extra, more of the money out later this year. The next provision for relief, the banks committed to refinancing so everyone can take advantage of the lower rates that are now available. This is going to cost them about $3 billion, but they said, you know, they will be reaching out to people, and we have to make sure that if folks that you know, people in your congregations, have a mortgage with one of the 5 big banks, that they're getting contacted by the bank. That's their legal obligation to reach out and say, we're going to offer you better terms. The third provision is even more significant. For the first time, the banks have committed and are legally obligated to write down principal. And we have already started hearing about this. There are several people in New York who've had more than $100,000 of principal written down by a bank. It is something that makes economic sense. I argue to my friends in finance that you are better off having, instead of having someone with a $200,000 mortgage that's always on the edge of default, write something down. Have a $150,000 mortgage that you know is going to be okay. So we're going to start to see more and more of these programs. I've been working with Chief Judge Lippman and the judicial system. They are having special parts for foreclosures now. We're going to make sure that as many New Yorkers as possible get principal reduced so they can stay in their homes. HUD estimates that we're going to have about $500 million of principal reduction for New Yorkers. My goal is to get more, which is why I made sure we have more legal services than anyone else, so we're going to have the sharp lawyers watching out to make sure that the banks do what they're supposed to do. And then finally, we reform the servicing standards. So the banks no longer can make foreclosure their first choice. They have an obligation to try these other remedies. There is a national monitor that's been set up, is being funded by the banks, and is going to be issuing periodic reports. There's one that's due to come out at the end of this month, showing which bank is doing what, so we can all see it, it'll all be transparent. So we reformed the servicing standards. We got a program for principal reduction. We got a program for rate reduction. We got the lawyers and the housing councils to make sure they do what they're supposed to and that your constituents can get advice. But the national monitor is going to oversee the settlement and ensure compliance, but I do need your help. First of all, in making sure that people know about this, and second of all, making sure that if you hear any reports of banks not following through, that we know. Our office, the folks who are here with me now, are working on this. We are going to have a foreclosure hotline. The first time in the history of New York State, we're going to have a statewide hotline that you can call to get information about foreclosure abuse. That's a part of our program. So that's what's in the settlement. More important And this is where I have to say, and I have to give credit to the president for having listened to what I and a lot of other people had to say, because Eric was very kind to give me credit for standing up to other AGs. But it wasn't me standing up to the other AGs that got this done. Housing activist groups, civil rights organizations like the NAACP and La Raza stood up with us. Labor unions, the AFL-CIO, SEIU, Unite Here stood with us rock solid, saying, you can change the servicing rules, but do not give up your claims for any criminal liability, any investigation of the securities fraud that led to the bubble and crash. So all of those claims were preserved. We did not give any of those up when we negotiated the servicing settlement, and that's something that I take particular pride in. So, what's next? What's next is something that was a very dramatic turnaround. There was criticism that nobody was being held accountable, and an old expression from the last Great Depression, if a farmer robs a bank, there's 10 people there to investigate. If a bank robs a farmer, no one pays any attention. That's from Woody Guthrie. But the principle many people felt applied with this crash also. What happened was, in addition to narrowing the releases, in the State of the Union address in the end of January, President Obama introduced a new mortgage-backed securities investigation and working group by saying that I believe, this is the president, everyone deserves a fair shot, everyone should pay their fair share, and there has to be one set of rules for everyone. And to make sure there's one set of rules for everyone, we're creating an unprecedented state-federal task force to investigate the conduct. And he named me as one of the co-chairs of the task force. We have in this task force the Federal Justice Department, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the new Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. You may have just seen in the paper going after credit card companies. They're in it with us. The FBI, the Internal Revenue Service. So this is a comprehensive framework for investigation. We're working very hard on it. I can't go into details about exactly what we're doing. I think we should look for results in the months ahead for some accountability to the folks that caused the bubble and the crash. And it's important to understand that while, having laws to enforce doesn't mean you have the will to enforce the laws. Knowing the truth without the spirit is not enough. And I urge all of you to encourage your constituents to speak up, to reach out, to ask what they are eligible for, and frankly, to continue to hold elected officials accountable, because what happened really was not just me speaking up, but there was this great popular outcry last year, and it continues, of people saying, we want one set of rules for everyone. We want to know that there's no one that's above the law, no matter how high your position is, no matter how fancy your office is. There's something fundamentally unjust and un-American about some people being able to break the law and having no consequences. And that message has to go. So, our goals: to hold accountable institutions that violated the law. Very important, because there were, I believe, acts that were illegal that took place. Second, obtain more relief, even than this national settlement, more relief for those that were injured, the homeowners and the investors. And third, equally important, we have to get the facts out in the open, right? We have to tell the truth, that if you deregulate and say, oh, well, banks can do whatever they want, they'll make their own rules. We can trust them with the LIBOR. They'll all tell us the truth about what the rate is they're borrowing. Well, no, we can't. Okay, so this is something, and I tell my friends, I spent 15 years in private practice. I spent more of my career in private practice than I have in government. I represented Merrill Lynch. I represented stock exchanges and commodity exchanges. I know this world. These guys are like goldfish. If there's too much food in the tank, they will eat themselves to death. So we have to get the facts out in the open, because it's good to work hard. It's good to try and make money, but it should be a football game, not a street fight. When they blow the whistle, everyone should stop. We passed the point now where the people blow the whistle and someone hits you in the head with a bottle. Oh well, if you could get away with it, you were considered a good business person, right? We can get away with, I don't even pay minimum wage. I can get away with all sorts of things. No, there has to be a set of rules and they have to be enforced. In this area, we get the facts out and we support those in Congress and elsewhere who are trying to enact a new set of rules to make the market safe again. Public confidence in investment has never been lower. This is not good for my friends on Wall Street either, and they know it. Small investors have not come back into the market, and they will not until they believe that it's something other than a rigged casino. So my goal is to obtain justice, obtain compensation, but also to get the facts out so we can get the American markets working again the way they did for decades, when they were good places to invest your money and the public had confidence that a AAA rating meant something and that no one could steal your money through some process that was opaque and impossible for you to understand. So what can you do to help? One of the most challenging things about this work is trying to get the people who are eligible for benefits to take advantage of those benefits. If anyone in your congregation or anyone else you know needs information, please visit our website. We've got a www.nysmortgagesettlement.com special website we've set up. New York City already has a hotline for people facing foreclosures. We are in the process of setting up a statewide hotline so that everyone else in the state has that available to them. So the message is very simple. If you become aware of a scam or a fraud against homeowners, either in giving them a mortgage or there are people who now come in pretending these scamsters, so you got to give them credit for being creative. There are people now coming in and saying, "Hi, I'm from Wells Fargo and I'm part of the National Mortgage Settlement. If you give me your Social Security number, I'll tell you." Watch out for those as well. Report scams to our office. Report anyone who's trying to sell people on a too good to be true deal on a mortgage. But please, my goal is to make sure that New York gets as big a share of this national settlement as we can. My goal is to continue our investigation and continue to push my colleagues in the federal government that the investigations have to go forward, that the laws have to be rewritten to make us all safer and to make it possible for everyone to make money honestly and for there to be one set of rules for us all. That's essential to our markets functioning. That's essential to our democracy functioning. So that is my report to you today. I know what I have to do. I know what we have to do. We're admonished to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with our God. Now, Senator Adams and I are in a remedial, humble walking program to try and encourage us to get the humility part of that down. But I assure you, there is no lack of desire or commitment on his part, on my part, or on the part of a lot of other people across this country to see that justice is done and that our housing market starts to work again for the people it's supposed to work for. This is supposed to be about people in their homes, being able to stay in their homes, working and playing by the rules, and getting what they deserve. Thank you very much.